I'm Neil Waltmeyer. I'm the Senior Communications Manager for the Responsible Budget Coalition. One of my main responsibilities is preparing people to talk to the public and to talk to the press. And I will be discussing a lot of things on this handout you see here, effective ways to discuss a responsible budget. On the back of it, it says RBC talking points. So we'll start at the front, effective ways to discuss a budget. One of the things to remember when talking to the public and talking to the press, it's a lot like singing a song. Don't worry, I'm not going to make any of you sing. But what are components of the song, specifically the lyrics? The verses, chorus, right? Right, and the chorus is often repeated 3 or 4 times throughout the song. It's the main message. And what's easier to remember, the verses or the chorus? The chorus, right? It's the main message and it's repeated. And it's the same technique when we're talking to the press. We should be repeating our chorus. And the chorus of the RBC is in 2 parts. And you see it at the top of that sheet in bold. The first part of it is the governor and lawmakers must set aside non-budget agendas and instead pass a budget that puts people on the agenda. So we're really contrasting what's talked about here in our community versus what politicians may want. The priorities of families and communities comes first. Number 2, the governor and lawmakers can choose revenue or they can choose to make further cuts to services that families and communities rely on, like Meals on Wheels, like college for hardworking families, like substance abuse treatment. And so it's a real choice between choosing revenue and choosing further cuts. And right now, by default, our lawmakers and the governor are choosing cuts, and we're seeing the results of those right now. The other way to think about it is a headline. If you're repeating your chorus, a lot of times that shows up in the headline. And a good headline for us is community calls for the legislature to choose revenue over cuts to substance abuse in college. You know, sub-headline, they say put the governor's non-budget agenda aside and put the people first, right? And so that's the kind of driving message that we have. You should remind people why the service matters. You should tie it back to the underlying value that it enhances. And some of those values are, opportunity, rewarding hard work, creating jobs, right? That American dream that everybody strives for. Dignity and independence, learning, health and safety, family and community, right? It's not just what's happening to me, it's what's happening to my family, my entire community. You should always personalize it when you can, why the budget impasse is affecting you, your family, your community, what's happening in our backyards. You always should be specific, and you have to tie revenue, when you're pushing for revenue, which we absolutely have to do, you have to tie it to what it pays for. And obviously it pays for a whole plethora of services that we know are important. But you always got to name at least one, and often 2 or 3, 1 to 3 services always, and contrast that. We need to choose revenue so hardworking people can go to college. So, we have substance abuse treatment to keep our families and communities safe, and in order for our grandparents to have Meals on Wheels, things like that. And it's very useful if you can give an example of a revenue option and contrast it with the cut. We can choose corporate loopholes instead of cutting Meals on Wheels. Remember community, we live in working communities, and so don't forget to talk about how your service affects the broader community. It helps public safety, helps the economy, those kind of things, save taxpayers money. There's many ways to talk about the budget, and we're not all affected the same way. There's not just one type of person that's affected. And I would really discourage you from using terms like poor or vulnerable. They don't move the dial. People don't think of themselves in those terms. If you want to talk about somebody who's working really hard and it's low income, say this is somebody working 2 jobs struggling to make ends meet. Talking about somebody who may be low income. Talk about our children, somebody in our community that deserves an opportunity to get a good education and have a future. And finally, tell truths without mentioning myths. right? When you mention a myth, you reinforce the myth. People suggest that if you're bringing it up, there must be some legitimacy to it, right? Certainly there's some myths out there that you want to address, but the way to address them is to mention a truth without mentioning the myth, right? What if you're hearing about Illinois being a high-tax state, right? Instead of talking about that, say, Illinois underinvests in education and the things that make our community strong because we have the lowest income tax rate in the Midwest. That's the way to address it. Or if people are talking about waste in government, you don't want to talk directly to that. Talk about a service that that works really great. The Wells Center provides a quality service that saves taxpayers tens of thousands of dollars a year and helps make our community stronger. That's the way to address myths without reinforcing them. On the back, I won't talk a lot about that, but I would encourage you to take a look at the RBC talking points. It has our main message at the bottom. Those last 4 or 5 bullet points are particularly helpful in talking about the budget. Some of the higher ones are kind of more of a background thing. So, encourage. Take a look at that. Secondly, I want to talk about how to have a good media interview with a TV reporter or a print reporter. Does anybody know when you're watching the local news, they usually have a quick clip of an interview with somebody at a press conference or something. Does anybody know what the typical length of that clip is? Like on average?
30 seconds. 20 seconds.
Huh?
20 seconds.
3, 20? Anybody else? The average is 9 seconds. It's not a lot of time at all. And because we don't have a lot of time, it is crucial that we anticipate what questions will be asked, that we write out our answers to those questions, and we practice the responses to those questions. And people talk about practicing all the time. It's not just a nice to have, it's a really essential thing to do. Because when you have the 9 seconds, that's all you have to get your message across. If they're only reading the newspaper headline, if you can get something very solid that gets the point across, that's what the headline is and everybody sees it. And that's why it's important to stay on your message and not get distracted or respond to things that don't move the cause forward. Take a minute to prepare, don't get rushed. Let's say you're having an interview, let's say you've had a press conference and they say, I want to interview afterwards. If you feel it, take a second to regroup. Ask the reporter, hey, can I go look at my notes? I want to make sure everything's okay. Feel free to ask them to go to the bathroom and go look at your notes there, practice. If someone calls you on the phone, I never talk to a reporter right when they call me. I always say that I'm in the middle of something and ask them, what would you like to talk about? Can I call you back in 5 or 10 minutes? And I think about what they'll ask me, and I think about exactly how I will respond to it. And that's a good rule of thumb. So you get that quote, you get that 9 seconds there to something that really advances the cause of fully funding our services. Often you might have a formal program. We do this a lot. It's often, most times, especially with TV, they'll take an individual interview rather than the formal program. It's easier for them to slice together. So just remember that that interview is just as important as the formal speech or the formal program. Repeat your main message, right? Repeat your chorus. Remember that almost always you're not live, so repeat yourself 3, 4, or 5 times. The reporter isn't going to think that's odd. They see that all the time. They really want a good soundbite. They want something that looks good on TV, so they want you to be able to make your message really concisely and really strongly. Sometimes I've done it where I jumble up some words, so it's important to repeat yourself so you really make sure that that message comes through. Repeat reporter's question if it's a good one, so it makes for a better soundbite. Instead of just saying yes or yeah, that's right. Like, repeat the question back to them so they have a good soundbite. The one time that you don't want to repeat a question back to them is if the reporter says something that's not true or something you disagree with. Then don't repeat that. Start off with the message that you're trying to do. And there's some ways that you can pivot off to do that effectively. But it's important to remember That you don't want that 5 seconds talking about whether there's waste in government or some odd issue, non-budget issue, or you're off talking about this or that. You want to talk about getting funding for your services. Don't speculate or speak out loud. Don't exaggerate or lie. It's perfectly fine to say I don't know. You can always find the information for them later. You can refer them to somebody like me, or you can say, you know, I'm sorry, I don't have that information. We'll try our best, and that's perfectly okay. You don't want to say something that's not true. You want to get the facts out there, and you want to get your message out there. And finally, a reporter will always ask you, do you have anything to add? And the answer is always yes. It's always yes. Always repeat your main point one more time to make sure it gets across there. So I think Dan and I are going to do a little role play. I'm going to try to remember what I was going to say. So Dan, go ahead. I'll be the person. You know, Mother's Day was just this past Sunday, and we actually did a Mother's Day event. RBC had a report about how the budget impasse was affecting women and mothers. And so in this scenario, I'll just talk about that report and like an event we did very recently.
So why are you here today?
I'm here today because mothers and grandmothers across Central Illinois are losing opportunities and independence. And we just had a report released by the Responsible Budget Coalition that shows that it's creating barriers for women and mothers. And so what our representative needs to do, Representative Smith, he needs to put non-budget issues aside and focus on services for our mothers and grandmothers. He needs to choose revenue so the services our mothers and women rely on are funded.
So when you say choose revenue, you mean raise taxes, right?
Choosing revenue can mean a lot of different things. It can mean closing corporate loopholes, so Meals on Wheels for our grandmothers can be funded. It can mean taxing high-end services so that hardworking mothers can go to college. Those are just some examples. There are a lot of them available, and I can get you a sheet with a whole bunch of them.
And it sounds like you're saying there shouldn't be any cuts, but doesn't there have to be a balance of cuts and revenue?
No. What we shouldn't be making a choice between is cutting Meals on Wheels for grandmothers or cutting domestic services for domestic violence survivors. We shouldn't be choosing between cutting off opportunities to go to college and funding after-school programs that our public safety officials say save taxpayer money and keep us safe. What we should be doing instead is choosing revenue.
You know, this budget impasse has gone on for 11 months, and it's really hurting people. Whose fault is it? Who's to blame for this?
I'd like to focus more on who can solve the problem. And I think Representative Smith can ask his leadership to put the non-budget issues aside and choose revenue to fund services our mothers rely on.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, our mothers and grandmothers are losing opportunity and independence because of this budget impasse. And we're asking Representative Smith to ask his leadership to put non-budget issues aside and choose revenue to support services our mothers rely on, like college, like Meals on Wheels, like substance abuse treatment that helps our community. Those type of services we need to reinvest in. We need to stop making cuts. We need to choose revenue instead.
Thank you.
Thanks.